Welcome to Love of One, Healing and Transformation podcast. In today's episode, I sit down with Kimo Kepano, also known as the Light Seer. Today, we explore how healing happens through frequency, remembrance, and connecting with the true essence of who we are. This is a conversation about igniting what has always lived within you. Welcome back to another episode of Love of One, Healing and Transformation podcast. Today, I am so honored to have Kimo Kepano. Can you want to say that just so people can
Kimo
understand it?
Kepano.
Kimo. I just like the way you say it best. I really do.
Alright.
I've been seeing Kimo for a little while now. We've had 3 sessions together, and they've been so fantastic and phenomenal and eye-opening on so many levels within myself that I really thought it would be important to share with other people within my community. Not only is it physically healing and helpful, but it's also on many different levels. Like, not only can you see light, and I'll let you explain because you can explain so much better than myself, but that's not all you do. And I feel like there's so many facades of you and your healing and what you bring to people in a session. I just think it's so beautiful. So I want to try and touch on every little aspect of that today if we have time.
I would love
Yeah.
that. And thank you for that. I am so excited to be a part of this community that you have here. And we have had a chance to work together as practitioner and as a student. And now today we get a chance to kind of just flow and see where we go. That we're going behind the curtain to kind of
Yeah.
identify and assess what it's like for me as an energy worker. So why don't I just start off by introducing myself to your community and maybe
I would love that.
explaining a little bit about what the heck I do.
That's a great place to start.
For me, the way that I see the world is through frequency. And when I was a kid, I was very confused by that. I didn't really understand it. And in my Aboriginal and Native community, I was called seer very, very young. Now, I still was uncomfortable with that. But when you look at seership does a variety of things. I started to communicate very young to spiritual energy, pulling in information, things that no way that I could have known, first names, last names, locations, the way that someone died. And I wasn't afraid of it. It just was the way that I, moved throughout the world. And as I got older, we found that the perception of mediumship, just spirit communication, was actually expanding. It went into being able to perceive timelines, being able to perceive malady, being able to perceive how the human body actually shows up in a frequency field. Meaning that when I cross-reference my abilities with doctors and scientists, the way that cancer and tumors and problems in the body, from bone degeneration to stenosis to spondylitis, all of these different ailments and maladies actually show up as a frequency prior to a doctor ever sharing with me what the prognosis of the patient is. So when you take a look at it from there, then we have to ask a lot more questions. Well, first of all, how is it perceived? Well, it just looks like a frequency to me. But what can we learn about those frequencies? Okay, well, what causes those kinds of ailments and maladies? When you go back and really cross-reference it with how deep can I go into the actual frequency of it, you find that majority of everything is emotional. So if we take a look at the way that we've been able to quantify that's all quantified studies that we do now. But when you look at those things, knowing that you can quantify maladies and ailments, how else can you utilize it? Well, then it gets very metaphysical and esoteric, because then it goes into the fields of things that are harder to quantify through science, but you can qualify through the experience, which means that every way that you experience intuition looks like a frequency. The way that you stand outside in nature and your body recalibrates your EMF field looks like a frequency. So those are the things that is a little more challenging to quantify, but it can still be qualified. So the way that I work today is to teach other individuals, skilled practitioners like yourselves or complete neophytes, to assess and analyze and activate what is natural to their body by doing training, by doing development, by exercising the abilities so you can be the highest level of you that you possibly can.
That's interesting. I like that. That keeps it much more simplified.
Yeah, and I really hope
Yeah.
that we can begin to bridge the gap between being a nexus point of science and in the metaphysical community. I think that science is catching up to the
Yeah.
metaphysical community being able to quantify a lot of things that we've already known to be true. But I also think that the spiritual community needs a timeout. I think that
Mhm.
they are kind of repeating a lot of old archaic belief systems that are built in fear and that are built in the state of not knowing information. So then we kind of create an idea of what it could be without getting the evidence of that. We need a bit of a timeout while the scientific community catches up, and then we need
I
to
think,
get a
yeah,
big reboot.
yeah, I think that's a good point because that's funny you mentioned that. In all of my research and work, and now that I have this podcast as well, so I've been putting myself out there more, reading more books and everything, and I do seem to see like a pattern where a lot of the same things are being repeated and repeated, where science is now saying, yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think you're right. I think we need to step back in the spiritual space and just take a pause, try to
Mhm.
see if we can come up with new information that then science can then also, come up to speed with as well and give them space to catch up with stuff that's already been out there for quite some time. Yeah.
Yeah, and not only that, this is where things get really challenging within the spiritual community because for the most part of the spiritual community, it has been a diversion away from more Christianic dogma, right?
Mhm.
Moving away from that
Mhm.
idea. However, because the spiritual community has moved into that form, that time era started to happen in the late 1800s. When that started to happen, we don't realize that we have created our own spiritual dogma. And even that needs a timeout because it
Mhm.
is also outdated.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
when we go into new pedagogical approaches to learning how to work with true essence of spiritual information, we also have to relearn it ourselves because
Mhm.
we have so many old archaic beliefs like don't put a welcome mat in front of your door, don't put two mirrors facing each other. That's old, baby. That's so old and not helpful. I can understand the seed of that thought because of the
Mhm.
energy of the intention, but that's still creating some form of now
Yeah.
spiritual dogma that is
Mhm.
not serving us, which is why we do need a timeout to reboot and recalibrate as the scientific community catches up with us.
Yeah, I like that. So speaking of some old news,
Towel.
you when I came to see you the first time, you could understand who my guides were, or you could hear them, you could talk to them and relay messages. But that's not really what the seer is, or is it?
But it is an aspect of seership. So when we try to make it very succinct, what is the definition of seer? It is the
Mhm.
ability to find quantifiable evidence of abstract information and very physical, literal information, and the ability to cross-reference that everything to be cross-referenced towards the alignment of healing and growth. So,
Mhm.
for example, there are a lot of people who proclaim to be seers, but they're actually just mediums.
Mhm.
Or they proclaim to be seers or they're intuitive. They proclaim to be seers and they're psychics. The goal is to take all of that, throw it
Mhm.
together in a great big melting pot to align the intention to be about the highest level of good, the highest level of healing. And when you can get the healing activations to start to happen, emotional healing, spiritual healing, physical healing, and more, then you move into seership.
Mhm. Yeah, that makes sense to me. Because I think that too, that also has some old dogma of it is
Oh,
that
yeah.
if you're a seer, I'm clairvoyant, right? And I can see
Hmm.
everything. Well,
Hmm.
well, I am clairvoyant, but I can't always see energy fields or auras or,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I can see sometimes I can see other people, other energies mixing with other people's auras or
Yeah.
fields if I know that they have some sort of an attachment there that needs help exiting and going to the light. Uh, but I can't see everything. So I think it is important to have that distinction between mediumship, between clairvoyance, between whatever it is, so that when someone says, "Oh, I'm a seer" or "I'm clairvoyant," all of a sudden I think, and it's education too, that people just assume I can see everything.
Right, right. It's times even that title for me, sometimes I push against it, even in my own
Mhm,
community. I
mhm,
was labeled the high seer quite young. And even in my own spiritual community within my Aboriginal practice, I still pushed against it a little bit because I don't want anything to feel like I am elevated.
Mhm.
You know,
Mhm.
I'm acutely aware that what I see is quite profound. I know that no one has to tell me that information. However, it doesn't mean that I am more unique or special than anyone else. It just means that that's what was natural to me. But it's
Okay.
not just what was natural. I had to train those abilities to fine tune them. So that way I know the difference between my imagination and what is quantifiable. I know the differences between my instinct, it's quantifiable. I know the differences between my hunches, quantifiable. And that is the developmental part. I think that a lot of people show the potentiality to be seer, but then it gets distracted with no development and too much imagination, which then turns into fear. And
Mhm.
fear is such a cloudy lens.
It really is, yeah. And so you do offer training with people of all different kinds. Do
Yes.
you find that when you train people that it gets more potent of what their gift is that they brought here with them? And with that, do you find that most of them continue on to use it, or do they find it, they see it, they kinda understand it, and then they draw back from it?
It really depends on what the intention is. So I do have a lot of neophytes who are just curious, but I also have a lot of advanced practitioners, a lot of people who own their own business, similar to you. And it just depends on what they want to utilize to do. And I actually do make a differentiation between gift and ability. And even in my own semantics, I started to change that because I found when you watch a lot of these now that we have social media, a lot of these mediums and psychics and intuitives talk about my gift this, my gift that. It's a lot of ego,
Mhm.
whereas I have it, you don't. I have it, you don't. So I think that the transition between gift and ability meaning exercised, worked through the ability to expand what is perhaps naturally talented for you, actually is more encompassing and it actually challenges the brain to work a little bit differently. So when I am working with a client and someone comes onto my Zoom, and when I make choice, everything is a choice. When I make choice to perceive how their intuition is in alignment, which once again, all intuition has its own series of alignments, meaning that clairvoyancy has a pattern, and sentience has a pattern, and loquience has a pattern. When you look at those different patterns, you can assess, well, where is her pattern at? What is more dominant? What is growing? What was repressed? You can see that within her biofield. So when you take a look at what are we going to amplify, then it's my job as your seer to say, if I could spin the wheel of time forward, and if she can amplify this, what will she be able to do with it? Or even though this one is in high alignment, if I can get her to look at it in this way, what is the greatest level of good that she has access to? So that's why we have to vet our practitioners. I need everyone to vet me. Look at the way that I speak
Mhm.
on TV, look at the way that I speak in my writings, look at my modules, look at the way that I communicate to see if I'm your vibe. And if I
Mhm.
am your vibe, then you must trust me to be able to look ahead at your potentiality. That
Mm.
way I can help gather and steer you in a direction. What I don't think everyone understands, and you and I have talked about this recently, is that
Mhm.
as an educator, and I've been teaching since I was 16 years old, and I'm now approaching 50. But when I look at the educational approach, every
Mhm.
single client of mine has their own curriculum.
Mhm.
So, for example, hold on, I'm going to do it right now. If I look at
I love it.
your curriculum was first designed on February 3rd, 2025. So
Mhm.
I take a look at your curriculum and I literally design it ahead of time to say, how can we keep her on course? So
Mhm.
every single time you come into session with me, I say, great, we've worked on this, we worked on this. I need to ask about this. We're going to work on this. And every time we meet, we do a little bit of a reshifting of that curriculum, but I hold onto your curriculum for you as your educator. And you have
Mhm.
to trust me as your seer to be able to
Yeah,
educate you through the process
that makes
with
sense.
whatever you want.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, what I've been learning, what's really evident is everything's about intention, right? So, because we create our own
Everything is.
reality and it creates on our intention. So, we all have different abilities within us that we bring here that we want to do. We all have our goals of how we want things to look, what we want to do, how we want to participate, and what we want to give in the world. And it's really about, well, what does that look like on a grand scale? And then would you say, once we figure that out and then we could say, okay, I'm taking a piece of this, a piece of this, piece of this. How do we alchemize this into a container? And then we focus on that container and move it forward.
That's a really great way to look at it. I think to add another layer to it,
Hmm.
when someone communicates, we have to be able to, as seers, be able to identify the difference between brain activity and heart activity.
Hmm.
And I don't trust the brain activity nearly as much as I trust the heart activity, simply because of how
Hmm.
large that field is, right? And your
Hmm.
brain is filled with bias. It's supposed to be. It's how it keeps you safe. So there's lots of times when someone says, I want to work on this. But if your body tells me, actually, we've got this problem going on, we haven't done this, and there's something that she's not telling you, I ask
Hmm.
questions about what the body just told me. And I'll say,
Hmm.
okay, I'm gonna work on that with you. However, I want you to know that our body is also saying this and this and this. And clients will always say, yeah, that is going on for me. But then I still have to go back to the brain and say, so now what do you want? Do you still want to do it the original way, or do you want to pay attention to the body? And I will always go with where you tell me to go. Even though my opinion is you should focus on what the body says. If your brain can't handle it, it can't handle it. And I
Yeah.
can't change your narrative.
Hmm.
So if your
That's a
brain
good
says
point.
do this, then yeah.
In our last session, before I went to sit in ceremony with Mother Ayahuasca and Grandfather San Pedro, which we were discussing a little bit before we started, in our last session, I said, "Oh, I really want to focus on my breathing, right? On my lungs." And you said, "That sounds great, but I think your body is saying your hip really needs some help." And your left side of your hip is swirling. And are you sure? And I said, okay, well, I'm going to trust you. So yeah, let's go to the hip then. And funny enough, haha, when I sat with, before I even did ayahuasca, although she starts with you as soon as you sit in ceremony, we were doing breath work leading up to it. And guess what happened? They went to the hip and it was moving all this stuff out of my hip. And I felt like somebody was, really rubbing with a feather, which I thought was weird because I was wearing, like, a long dress, so how
Yeah.
could I feel this on my skin? And then I had to look up under my mask, and nobody was there. And they said, "'Member when Kimo was talking about that funnel? Well, we're
Mhm.
draining it out."
Yeah,
So,
good. Good. Oh my
yeah,
gosh, I love this
yeah.
epiphany that you're having. I
Yeah,
love it.
yeah, and then when that drained out, then my breathing started to work better.
Amazing, right?
Yeah.
And again, this is I love this moment that you're having. I think just to talk about it for just a brief moment, I have found because our brains are so quick, but they're so judgmentally quick, and
Yeah.
our body will always know before the brain. Sometimes, and my astrologer actually explains this very, very well. She goes, the way that you speak, it's a slow trickle for some of us. I slowly realize, and I take the time
Mm.
to organically realize in the way that I'm supposed to. So for you, in that moment of ceremony, when the manifestation of that happened, if had you not had maybe a breadcrumb of that earlier, you would have perhaps negated the sensation
For
close
sure.
to the hip, right?
Mhm.
And in that moment, it was very, very helpful for you. So I love that organic realization. Sometimes it is a slow trickle.
Mhm. Yeah. And which is another thing that I want to bring up with you today is that with my sessions with you, and I'm sure others experience the same thing, it really does do a remembrance, right?
Yeah.
So you kind of planted the seed of what your body wants to grow in a sense. But without that seed, I probably would have never connected the two together to move through it, to clear it. So it's
Yeah.
so that's also very clearing where your work doesn't just end after our session is over and Zoom closes down, right?
Right. It's a
Literally.
growing. So you seed it and
Mhm.
then you grow it, which to be candid and to
Mhm.
go back into my early development when I was in middle school and early on in high school before I started to teach, I greatly misused my abilities.
Mhm.
Big time. And I did it all the time. And I did it with my brothers. My all my siblings are seers. Right, and
Mhm.
my
Wow.
brothers and I are all a year apart. So we would very, very often, whenever things weren't going well for us in high school, like I wasn't testing very high or having problems in different social circles, the thing that my two brothers and I, because there's three of us, would always say is, well, are we going to use our abilities today to change that? And we would, meaning that I started to plant the seeds, foreshadow the seeds of things that I wanted to grow that were going to be only beneficial for me.
Mm,
In the way that I would communicate to a teacher. I had a very close relationship with all my principals,
mm,
right? And I would say, literally, I would sit them down and say, so we're having a meeting today because the way that this teacher is communicating to the students here is not very, very helpful. Now, to be honest, I wanted my grade changed. And I was
really?
fooled by if I
Oh,
plant the seeds of getting my grade to be changed, it'll be helpful for everyone. Now, granted, even though it could have been helpful for everyone, the motivation was my own ego,
mhm,
right?
mhm.
And what is another way of talking about that? It's manipulation, the
Of
ability
course.
to kind of manipulate and plant the seeds in own subjective ways. And that was not the most beneficial thing for me to do. And I had to learn how to undo that.
Mhm,
And again, I think that people perceive that you're seer or that I am all love, light, and rainbows, but it hasn't been all love, light, and rainbows. The way that you see, the way that I allow myself to be seen now is through that energy, but it didn't start off that way. I had to learn how to
mm,
shift. I had to learn what does not work. I had to learn how to process and move past the seeding of things that were very egoic. So I bring that up as an aside because when you learn to trust your seer, you must be able to say what they perceive in me. Is it truly in the alignment for their highest good, or is it for their highest good? There's
mhm,
lots of seers out there who are spiritual
mhm,
narcissists. It's
mm,
for their
right,
highest good, not for
mhm,
yours.
mhm. Yeah, it's a good point. I've seen some of your social posts about vetting your practitioner, and I do
Yeah.
appreciate that because there have been some practitioners that I saw that I thought were pretty decent, and then but then intuitively, I just felt, you know,
Yeah.
something wasn't right, and then sometimes they can be tricksters too. You really have to just use your discernment, I think, more so in most of that.
Yeah. I think that what makes me sad is that a lot of times they don't know that they're being tricksters because
Yeah.
the power of the egoic fear is so high that you truly believe that it is in their highest alignment of good. But yet you're still scaring the crap out of people. And none of that is in the highest alignment of good. That is all submissive fear.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when we say that we want to vet your practitioner, I suggest you look at how they speak on a multitude of topic points. And again, I may not be everyone's cup of tea, and that's totally okay.
Yeah.
But you need to see how they communicate on multiple topic points on mediumship, on spiritual work, on tuning into guides, on healing work, on the ability to perceive a forecast, anything that they can bring into a session, you want to see how they communicate ahead of time.
Yeah. That's a good point. That's a good point. In one of our sessions, you had sparked another seed that I want to talk about, which
Mhm.
was all about the elements, right?
Mm.
And then when I was when I did some inner child work afterwards with another practitioner and my meditation, it came up that when I was younger, I was always outside, always. We talked about this before. I grew up outside, outdoors, kind of like Little House on the Prairie, Laura Ingalls style. And, I was never allowed to come back in unless it was dinner time and then had to go right back out. When you mentioned that to me through my guides and saw it in my body, I was like, oh, I think I remember that. And then doing inner child work, it came out that I used to talked with the trees and the fairies all the time when I was younger, and how I would talk with the water, and they showed me that I was like this, and my inner child was so saddened by it because no one believed me, and so they dimmed my light, and they showed me this tiny little music box, those ones with the
Yep,
ballerina that
yep.
twist around. So when I get in trouble when I was younger, my mom would take everything out of my room except for that music box. So etherically, my younger self put all of those gifts or abilities or whatever
Mhm.
we used to do and stored them in that little box. And then during that session, after she showed me everything, we moved through it, she opened that box, everything came out. And then all of a sudden, now all these different things have been happening with me and for me with the water, with with the air and with Earth herself. And so that when I went in ceremony with San Pedro, he really showed me how to work with them on a grander scale, and then made me stay outside, like, the entire journey for 12 hours. Funny because last year he made me stay inside the whole 12 hours, and then I was able to call in the fairies with light language. They came, they helped me,
Mhm.
they showed me how to work with them, so thank you for that too. And I know that you also use the elements in your work. Is there anything that you'd like to share with that for other people and how maybe they
Yeah.
can also be more in touch because I think right now we need to do that more with Mother Earth at least and everything else that is around us.
Well, let's address for those people who are curious, how did I know what was going on for you when it comes to your connection to
Mhm,
elemental energy? Because your frequency still shows it even as an adult.
mhm,
Meaning, when I just look at you, and here's what I do.
mhm.
If I allow myself to see everything that I can see all at the same time, I actually get panic attacks.
I
So I
bet.
have to make choice to perceive what I choose to perceive. So
Mhm,
when I make choice to say, let me take a look at the alignment of her frequency, you show up with old residual. I call this clear proprioception, which is the ability to alkalize harmonically with elemental energy. How
mhm,
do I know that you still have that? Because it actually, the color kind of looks like earth, but it's in the shape
mhm,
of like an abstract mushroom that moves
mhm,
around the body. And the way that I say with confidence that you have a connection to that is that everyone that has a connection to that has always been an outside learner.
mhm,
It's never not shown up in their
mhm,
biofield. And yours
mhm,
is still there. It just looks like you put it to the back of the room, which is why when we were in session, I said, you have this ability. And then when I spin the wheel of time and go backwards, you can see where it was negated. You can
mhm,
see where the door was closed. You can see where it stopped because of
mhm,
insecurity being, or whatever that might be, right? You can see
mhm,
where it stops. So what my goal as your healer and as your seer is to, what would happen if we opened the door again as an
mhm,
adult? And then through your own subjective experience of going through San Pedro, then you realize, wow, this not only has been wanting to reopen, but wanting to ignite and
yes.
to
Mhm,
guide. Because now as an adult, I can experience it all over again, but this time with more analytical mind. That's what it looks like for me, which is why I said what I said. Now, when it comes to clear proprioception and the ability to tune in elementally, what does that look like? It looks like, how can I utilize literal elemental energy from the stone to the sand to the sea to the tree? How can I identify a connection point to those energies to amplify my own field? Now, that feels strange to say it that
mhm,
way until you create an intention of alkalizing your energy with the stone and the sea and the sand and the tree. When you make a pinpointed connection, meaning I intend to connect your biofield, your actual biofield, we'll hook you through electrodes, actually does an amplification. It's
mhm,
all about the intention and the request. So, for example, when I first started to test clear proprioception, I started to do it in healings, meaning I'd be working with someone and I could see that they had this residual mushroom like energy of clear proprioception, but completely knocked off in
mhm,
meditation. And if they were going through some kind of like major body problem that they wanted my assistance with, I'd put them into meditation. They'd close their eyes. And what they don't realize is that I would be reaching out my hands to say, well, what would happen then if I reconnected them? So I'd reach out my hands and reach towards the closest tree. Right,
mhm,
and then for me, 'cause it's visual, I can see that essence of the tree say, "Did you want some assistance? Great, let's get all of our friends." And they will amplify my biofield to then conduit to that biofield of the person. And that's when I first started to realize that healing can be amplified by using elemental energy. Now, my technique has changed since then. Now I try to just push it directly towards them, and their bodies begin to shift and change because their body already has a connection to it. It just forgot.
hmm. That makes sense to me. Yeah. Hmm. That's beautiful.
So what's happening then is we make requests. And for some individuals who don't understand any of this, it would be like sending a prayer.
Mm, mhm,
Asking for the assistance of God or Christ consciousness to give you insight or to offer assistance to the person who is in need. It's very similar to that. And in fact, it could be argued that it is exactly the same.
exactly the same. Yeah.
It's just
Yeah.
that the semantics are changing.
Sure, sure. That makes sense. What what do you find people come to you mostly for? And do they understand what it is you're offering them when
Yeah,
they
it's
see you the
it's
first
it's
time?
quite seasonal,
Mhm.
to be honest.
Mhm.
When I first opened my practice, it was specifically for spiritual work. meaning
Mhm.
how do I connect to spiritual intelligence, to my guides and stuff like that. And then the season changed, and then it went into more intuitive work. It went into more intuitive work kind of around 2021, towards the beginning
Okay.
of COVID. It kind of went into more intuitive work, but the seasons have shifted again. Now in 2025, it's predominantly going in. This is interesting. It's predominantly going into more healing work, but more healing business work. 2024 was mostly about healing. But
Mm,
2025, so far at least, is how people are saying, but how can I heal my connection to my employment? How
I
can
see.
I heal my connection to the way that I think about money and my success? That tends to be the current season.
I do feel that way the current season. It seems like a lot of healing practitioners are switching a lot to the money frequency right now. Like
They
there's
are.
a lot of, but why do you think that is? Do you think that there's a lot of fear right now because of the economy? So people are, or
Yeah.
they want to
Yeah.
live a
So
better life, or all the above?
all the above. So there
Mhm.
is definitely fear in the economy, which is going to color the way that you perceive yourself, your outcomes, your success rates. 100% that is a part of it. It is also energetic. It's not just my fear of what I don't understand. When we take a look at the money aspect, I think that we're in an era right now where we're really trying to identify, what am I imbalanced to? What am I imbalanced to? And that has everything to do with money. So, for example, and this might be a further conversation we can have one on one, but when you take a look at money, money shows up as an actual frequency.
Mhm.
And it's a little confusing because we all identify money differently, whether you're in Canada using a loonie or a toonie, or you're using a lira or a mark or a buck or a pound. It's all very different, but the energetics of it is all the same. Visually, for those of you that are curious, visually, it looks like a very tight, threaded spiral screw that moves horizontally. And that spirally screw-like energy is different per person. It's different per company, which means that everyone's frequency is going to modulate contingent on what they want the business to be about. If you want all these lofty things, but the belief system is not in the same tempo, you're never going to catch it.
Mhm.
If you want this to modulate at the same place, you've got to find the exact modulation. I find that we overshoot it, undershoot it, overshoot it, undershoot it. I negate all of my stuff. I overshoot. I want to be a millionaire, but I don't know all of the modulations of what it would take for my body to believe that I'm a millionaire, which means that your money vibration is direct connections to what you believe to be true. So when we take a look at shifting and reassessing as a practitioner, as a business owner, needing to make more money, needing to have more capital, all of that is my belief systems of what am I in connection to my worth? What is my worth in balance of? So I feel like we are now in this era where people are asking, but what am I worthy of? What do I believe to be my truth? How can I get that truth to be perceived inside of my body?
Is it like I'm torn in two different directions? I want this career, but I don't want this career anymore. And so I'm not odulating on that money thing because I can't
Because
make
now
up
it's
my mind.
fractionated. Yeah. So because it's fractionated,
Uh-huh.
energy says, well, then I don't know where to go. It's like you've got a swimming pool with a great big leak in it.
Mm, mhm,
The energy towards your success is fractionated. It moves in
mhm,
different directions simply because you don't know which direction to put it towards. And it's
mhm,
also important to remember that it doesn't ever have to be one.
mhm,
You could have 5 levels of success for your money.
mhm,
It doesn't have to be one. One is very hard for us because we think that I've got to be an accountant, I've got to be a doctor. So we think about it as more of a role and
yeah.
not about oh my gosh, what is that word? Encompassing,
Encompassing, like all
encompassing,
encompassing or
all,
encompassing, yeah. Yeah.
exactly, all of the things that equate how do I view my worth and how does my worth cross-reference with what I view as success. So
Mhm,
it's not, it doesn't have to be a one. It could be if you wanted it to, but it doesn't have to be.
yeah, and success as in, a lot of people talk about, you'll be success if you follow your passion. Is that because the energy of the passion of the heart is
Is joy.
stronger and joy, and so it aligns a lot more with that money frequency? If you're
Yeah. If
following
you
your
say to your,
passion of art, like I wanna be an let's say I wanna be an artist, but I feel like I'm gonna starve but so I don't take the jump. And so is that why the money's like undulating? But then if I say, okay, I'm going to do it and I just jump in and I do it, does that then meet that frequency?
Well, it will meet the frequency if you learn how to identify my worth of what that is. And it gets
Hmm.
hard because we say, well, in theory, my worth is this. I'm going to charge $1,000 for my painting because that's what it's worth. I spent all this time. But if your body does not believe you, then that will be very, very hard to obtain.
Oh,
So
so it
we
really
have to
comes down
learn.
to your worth of what
Yeah.
your belief of your worth.
And the fastest ways to quantify worth is to quantify where is my joy within my worth. And
Hmm.
again, that's just hooking you up to electrodes and assessing what happens when you perceive guilt and shame versus when you perceive love and joy and authenticity. It's a different spectrum. It's a higher
Hmm.
spectrum.
Hmm. That makes sense. That's so clear. I think that's going to be very clear for a lot of people listening.
I hope so.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's also important to remember that this spiral frequency is itself always moving.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah.
So
I mean,
once you
energy always
charge
moves.
it, you
Hmm.
have to organically shift when it shifts.
Hmm.
You
You
know,
have
when
to
it
take
shifts
the leap.
higher, when it shifts lower in order to maintain.
Hmm. Hmm. Taking action, right?
Yeah,
Yeah. That
good
makes
question.
sense. Hmm. We've also worked in the past of how to keep yourself grounded or let energies go when you're shifting from one thing to another. So, like in
Hmm.
a practitioner standpoint, we've worked together about when I'm done with my everyday job, then I clear my field. I do it a little, differently. Um,
Hmm.
then clear that out to then put my concentration, my energy over here and clears that field so it doesn't bring it over and overlap.
Yeah.
Is that the best way to explain that? And how can other people do that in their daily life as, when they say, "Don't bring your work home."
Right, right. That is a good way to look at it because I think that the platitudes are, well, you'll feel better if you surround yourself with a bubble of light. Well, that's just a ridiculous platitude because that's not true for everyone. And
Mhm,
again, everyone's experience, everyone's relationship, everyone's EMF is completely different. Is a good idea, but it's not thought through, which means that I have found that every single time we go to shift an emotional gear between the role of being mother to being boss to being CEO to being partner,
mhm,
being a chess player, whatever that might be, if we can identify that there are pivots to the energies within all those roles, the role of your healer or as the mother or as the businesswoman, all those roles are slightly different, which means the calibration should also be different.
mm.
If I make a blanket statement, I'm going to always just breathe in love and light and rainbows when I'm a healer. Okay, now my child, love and light and rainbows, but the technique should shift because the energy that you perceive yourself in those different roles is not the same.
No, it's totally different, right?
It's
And the
totally different. It's
emotions are
kind of
different.
like saying,
Mhm,
I want to learn how to speak Spanish, but I'm only taking Chinese. So you're learning language. It may
mhm,
not be your native tongue, but it's the wrong tongue.
mhm, mhm. That's a good example.
That's why I suggest have a multitude, have a vocabulary, you know, um, like book bag of all the different things that you can utilize per frequency. If I want to go in and take myself into work and work with clients today, I'm not gonna like hang out with my friends and have a beer before I go in because that's a completely different energy. That'd be a very non-responsible thing for me to do. Got to keep myself ready and agile at all times to be able to pivot on command. So for
Mhm,
example, I do not drink during the week. I mean, I'm not really much of a drinker anyway, but the only night of the week that I could have a drink would be a Friday night or a Saturday night because I do not take clients on Saturday. I can't drink Sunday because I have clients on Monday. So my responsibility towards the way that I have to calibrate, I need to be ready and agile at all times. If that
mhm,
means going into the role of this or going into this or this or this, and I wish that more people did that.
mhm.
How do I keep myself at a place where I could easily pivot? And if I'm intoxicated and overwhelmed by codependency or whatever that intoxication
Right.
is, you will not be able to perceive any kind of energetic shift. All you'll be shift
Yeah,
articulate that. And if
shift.
you can't perceive an energetic shift, then it feels like my life is overwhelming. I'm
Mhm.
easily overwhelmed, sensitive.
And you'll bring that into the session or you'll bring that into that relationship.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And speaking of roles and frequencies and crossing back and forth, we talked a little bit before we got started, and I do want to address it here because I think it is important because I'm also hearing that it might happen a little bit more frequently or start to. And I just want to make sure that the perception of what it is very clear. And I myself I'm struggling. I've just been back. So it's not like I've been sitting over here saying it doing the long of the short story, for months, just a couple days. But I want to talk about a walk-in
Yeah.
because I have experienced that just recently. And when you asked me, I just gave you the long of the short of it, right? So,
Mhm.
but it is a little different than what has been explained in the past, and I think this is where we talked about the spiritual dogma of things needs to
Mhm.
take a break because the way I had interpreted it and that it's been said many times in many different ways, but had always said that a walk-in is when your soul leaves, another one comes in, and that person has amnesia. And that is not what I experienced, and that is not what was explained to me. In fact, it was more of an overlay of a blueprint, not necessarily the full soul. What is
Mhm.
your take on a walk-in, and how do you see it as energy perceived or a different light, or what do you see? And have you seen it before?
Yes, quite often actually. So it's not as rare as you think it is. When it
Yeah.
comes to for those of us who are like, "What the heck is a walk-in?"
What are you 2 talking about? Yeah.
what the heck? But when you take a look at that heightened language with Dolores Cannon and quantum healing hypnosis techniques, the theory that we have our large oversoul, which is different than our spirit. Right now, we are spiritual beings, right? But then when your spirit crosses over, it has a connection to the larger imprint. And when you
Mhm.
take a look at that, sometimes the walk-in is the idea that my soul in this experience right now might say, I think that this aspect of him needs a break. So we're going to separate his body from his conscious soul and have a new soul walk in. In theory, my body should not really feel any major massive changes, but energetically, spiritually, emotionally, it might feel a shift. So it'll for some people, it's described as like night and day difference. Now, that's the broad teachings of what that would mean. It does not look like that, though, from a frequency perspective. From a frequency perspective, it's much simpler,
Mhm.
much, much simpler. And I think that the danger in talking about a walk-in is that if you're being told that from a non-educator, someone who doesn't know how to educate you through the learning of that, it sounds terrifying.
Mhm.
It sounds like, why would my soul ever leave my body? How's that physically possible? Could I still be alive? Like we go through all of these but what is
Fear-based
it?
things, yeah.
Yeah, so let's just simplify it. When I perceive a walk-in, most of us have them all the time, not in this big hyperbolized idea of my soul leaving, but in essence of there being a complete contract change
Mhm.
where you say, okay, before I go into this body of being this Hawaiian man teaching the things that I teach, that's my contract. I'm going to go through these experiences and these roles and be this family member and these relationships. This is what you are going to learn. There may be a moment where contractually I say, I don't want this contract anymore. I've learned the lesson. It has served me well, and I'm ready for new growth. So then I can literally cancel the contract out and bring in a new contract, which is going to feel like a night and day difference. Last year was so horrible and it had been 30 years of being horrible, and my life has completely shifted. I don't even think the same way anymore. Well, that's a
Mhm.
variant of what would be perceived as a walk in. It is a contract completion and then a new contract write up. Now, there are ways to have smaller versions of that. Sometimes it's through an extended warranty. Doctor says
Yeah.
she's got 2 months to live, but she lives for another 20 years. Great, extended warranty.
Mhm.
Come in through with some kind of amendment to the contract.
Mhm.
I was partnered with this person for 10 years. We had a good life, but he ended up being a narcissistic a-hole and he fooled around and he did all those things. Great. So then I'm going to amend my contract with them. That lesson is now learned. I take those lessons and I will develop and change and make the appropriate amounts of growth from there. So now I'm going to amend that part of my contract to say all the things that I wanted to learn, I now need to learn in a different way. It
Mm.
happens all the time. It doesn't look like a great big, new soul walking in. It just looks like a contract change. But what's really fascinating is that sometimes that contract change, when you look at the other individual, like let's just say that I'm looking at you and you did a true contract change, your whole entire color would look different. I don't mean aura, chakra. I mean the energy of the soul system can actually look different. Or it looks like it ombres out into another color.
Mhm. Mhm.
So
Yeah.
just in terms of how we can simplify that,
Mhm.
contracts.
Yeah. That's how it was explained to me. It was just a contract. Like, I was done with that. I did learn my lessons, and now I'm beginning this new rebirth, this new chapter, this mission that I'm on,
Yeah,
and now it's time for me to step into that mission. So now I have a new contract that's solely based on this mission ahead of me.
I love that. And I feel like that is a healthier way within the spiritual community to take a look at what is my new change? What is my
Mhm.
new path? And that says I can still acknowledge and honor what the former path was. I hated that. He was such an a-hole. I never want to think about him again. Well, then the contract isn't finished.
No, no, you're still tied to that. Yeah.
You're still tied to it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, that makes sense. I did see myself after it happened. I saw myself, we talked about it, go into an eagle. Like, my old essence of
Yeah,
that part of me is
yeah,
now removed and it's free because eagles represent freedom, right? So,
yeah.
yeah, yeah, how
It's a
beautiful.
great question.
Well, thank you for clearing that up. And is there anything else that you feel like we must talk about today before we end this awesome, exciting conversation? Having such a good
I
time.
do. If I could end with anything else, is maybe a message to all of the new neophytes, beginners, practitioners, advanced practitioners.
For sure.
If we could really assess how critical it is for us to process the ego, all have ego. All of us do. We always will. Our
Mhm,
goal, at least I hope that our goal, is to assess when it serves me well and when it no longer serves me. When it serves me well is because I'm serving others,
mhm,
not just me, not just my own desires and needs. That's egoic. It's in that. And I think that one of the major things from the spiritual community and from the dogmatic religious community, the similarity is that we're all searching. The similarity is that we're all looking for assistance and information somewhere in the field of knowing. And that might manifest as God, it might manifest as Buddha, might manifest as Mohammed, it might manifest as GAIA consciousness, universal consciousness. If we could pay attention to what the goal is, which is understanding, when we look at that, it's easier to let go of the subjective understanding. It's only got to be through God, maybe through
mhm.
Buddha, right? And all of a sudden, it's no longer a goal, it is a wall. The walls have never served us. And if we even look at our modern politics, we're still really pushing the lesson because it is not only never served us, and we're trying so hard again, and it's still not serving us. We're putting up higher walls as opposed to realizing that the communal goal is insight and information, and I hope assistance. And if
Yeah,
any thoughts are out of alignment to being in service and assistance and of help, then I would say that maybe it's time to reassess the contract a little bit.
that's good. That is good. If we're not anchoring and serving from love, then we need to relook at it all in ourselves.
And when you cross-reference that with politics, well, no, because everyone needs to do it like this. That's ego, and that's heat.
Mhm.
Ego and heat make problems.
Yeah, yeah, for your body too.
Or your body, exactly.
Mhm.
So that's how I talk about, if I could give any kind of insight, would be, what are you doing to really remove yourself from the projected ego of self-serving? That goes back to what we said at the very beginning. It will be helpful for you to realize where you personally need a timeout.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. I have some kids, so I get time out really well.
Right?
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I know
Yeah.
there's lots of different ways to get a hold of you. What is your website for everyone who's listening today?
Yeah. So if you're curious, you can find me at thelightseer.com. It'll have a list of all my different ways that you can do learning, We have monthly seminars. We have Q&As. We have a Patreon that does small little 3 lessons a week. You have session availability. You can find me on TikTok as the Light Seer, Instagram as alohalightseer. We are also on Facebook and YouTube as the Light Seer. So there's a lot of different ways to find me. If you're wanting to do more modular learning and course learning, we also have courses that you can take. We have a whole bunch of quizzes that you can take on our website about, I learn about this. What kind of an intuitive am I? What kind of soul energy do I exude? So lots of ways for you to learn on your own. And hopefully you get a chance to do that in person as well. And I hope that you do it in person.
Yeah, because I love working with you. You're one of my favorite practitioners for sure, hands down.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. And we'll continue to work together in the
I hope
future.
so.
And all of his information will also be in the end of this episode, as well as the description of this episode for forever. So
Thank you.
thank you so much for your time today. It was such a pleasure.
You are welcome, friend.
Thank you for joining us today. If you would like to learn more about Kimo Kepano's work, schedule a session, or dive deeper into his teachings, you can visit him at thelightseer.com. I hope this conversation sparked something within you as well to remember more of who you are